My late brother's widow, jealous of my success, tried to frame me. She even forced her daughter to lie about me. But she didn't see what was coming next. I never imagined my life would look like this. I always figured my late 30s would involve settling down, maybe a wife, maybe kids. Instead, I found myself stepping into a role I never expected, that of a father figure to my 14-year-old niece, Emily. My name's Michael, and to give you a bit of context, Emily is my late brother Alex's daughter. He passed away 3 years ago in a car accident, leaving behind his wife Jessica and Emily. Since then, I've been their rock at least as much as I could be. I was always close to Alex. He was my little brother, my best friend. Losing him shattered me, but it hit Emily and Jessica even harder. I was the one who helped them get through the financial struggles, navigating insurance claims, and helping Jessica find work again. Still, it's not just about the money. Emily's teenage years have been, let's just say, complicated, and Jessica has been struggling with her own grief. More and more, I felt like the only thing holding this fragile family together. Recently, though, things shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. A couple of weeks ago, Jessica called me in tears, her voice barely recognizable through the sobs. She admitted she'd been struggling to make ends meet, even with my support. Jessica had been trying to hold down a part-time job while being there for Emily, but with bills stacking up, she felt like she was drowning. "Michael, I don't know what to do," she whispered, sounding exhausted. I could practically feel the weight of her grief and stress through the phone. It wasn't just about money. She was falling apart emotionally, too. "Jessica, I'll be there," I assured her. "We'll get through this." When I arrived, Emily wasn't home. Out at a friend's place, apparently. Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of wine in front of her, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. I had this sudden, overwhelming sense of responsibility. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes, something that made me uncomfortable. That night, we talked for hours. Jessica opened up in a way she never had before, confessing her fears of being a failure as a mother, her grief over losing Alex, and her deepening loneliness. We were both a little tipsy, and at one point, she reached across the table, grabbing my hand, holding it tightly. Her fingers lingered longer than I expected. I didn't pull away. It was strange. Here we were, two people brought together by tragedy, but something about her touch felt almost intimate. I dismissed it, though, chalking it up to Jessica's vulnerability and my need to protect her and Emily. The next day, Emily came home and barely acknowledged me, which was unusual. Usually, she'd at least crack a smile or roll her eyes at one of my terrible jokes. But lately, she'd been distant, closing herself off more and more. I worried she might be keeping things from her mom, but Jessica brushed it off, saying Emily was just being a teenager. Then, a week later, I found Emily sitting on the front steps of my house, looking pale and shaken. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the ground. "Emily, what's going on?" I asked gently, sitting beside her. She hesitated, then mumbled, "Uncle Mike, I don't know what to do. Mom's been acting strange. She gets really upset, and then she cries, and it's like she doesn't even see me. It's like I don't matter to her anymore." Her voice broke, and I felt my heart clench. Emily had already lost her dad, and now she was losing her connection with her mom, too. "I'm here for you, okay? No matter what," I assured her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Whatever you need." From that moment, I became her confidant. Emily started coming to me more often, especially when things got tense with Jessica. I could feel her clinging to me, desperate for stability in a world that felt like it was constantly shifting under her feet. Jessica's behavior became more erratic over the following months. She called me late at night, sounding frantic, venting about work or muttering things that didn't make sense. One night, I arrived at her place to find her pacing the living room, muttering under her breath, while Emily hid in her room, clearly distressed. "Jessica, this has to stop," I told her firmly, try to get through to her. But she turned on me, her face twisted with anger. "Don't you dare tell me how to raise my daughter," she snapped. Her anger was sharp, almost wild, and it was like looking at a stranger. I could see the fear in Emily's eyes as she peeked out from her room, watching her mother unravel. That night, I took Emily to stay at my place, promising her it was just temporary. "I'll talk to your mom," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll get this straightened out." Emily was silent on the drive to my house, but once we arrived, she looked at me with a mix of gratitude and desperation. "Thank you, Uncle Mike," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The next few days were a roller coaster. Jessica called constantly, swinging between desperate apologies and furious accusations. It was clear she felt betrayed by me, as if taking Emily to my place was an attack on her parenting. But I couldn't just leave Emily in that environment. She needed stability, someone she could depend on. One evening, Jessica showed up at my house unannounced. She was visibly upset, accusing me of trying to steal Emily away from her, claiming I was undermining her role as a mother. Her voice was loud, piercing, and I could see Emily shrinking back into herself, her expression a mix of fear and embarrassment. "Jessica, calm down," I said, trying to defuse the situation. "This isn't about you or me. It's about making sure Emily's okay." "She's my daughter," Jessica screamed, her voice cracking. "You don't get to make decisions for her." Emily, tears streaming down her face, looked up at her mother, visibly shaken. "Mom, please. You're scaring me." Jessica's expression softened for a moment. Then, as if something inside her snapped, she turned on her heel and left without another word, leaving Emily and me standing there in stunned silence. That night, Emily confessed that she was scared to go back home. She told me about the nights Jessica would drink herself into a stupor, leaving her to fend for herself. Her eyes were wide with fear as she recounted how her mom would lock herself in her room for hours or lash out over the smallest things. "I don't want to hate her," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "But sometimes it's like she's not even my mom anymore." Hearing that broke me. I knew Jessica was struggling, but I had no idea how deeply it was affecting Emily. I reassured her that she could stay with me as long as she needed. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let her down. But the situation with Jessica only got worse. She started showing up at Emily's school, creating scenes, and accusing the teachers of conspiring against her. I received frantic calls from the school asking me to come down and take care of things. It felt like I was constantly trying to put out fires, and each time it left me more exhausted than the last. One night, Jessica called me again, her voice slurred and pleading. She begged me to bring Emily home, promising things would be different. I could hear the desperation in her words, but I knew it was just another empty promise. I tried to reason with her, suggesting she consider getting help, but that only made her angrier before she hung up on me. Days turned into weeks, and Jessica's behavior grew even more unpredictable. She began spreading rumors around town, claiming I was trying to take Emily away from her, that I was poisoning Emily against her. The weight of it all was almost too much to bear, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to protect Emily, no matter the cost. Her against her mother. People I'd known for years started looking at me differently, and it hurt. I was just trying to do the right thing, but it felt like I was losing everyone in the process. One evening, as Emily and I were sitting down for dinner, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found a social worker standing there looking apologetic but firm. "Mr. Garrett," she said, holding a clipboard, "we've received complaints about you. Your sister-in-law, Jessica, has accused you of keeping Emily against her will." Emily, hearing the conversation, came to the door immediately. "That's not true," she blurted out, her voice shaking. "I want to stay here. Moms, she's not okay." The social worker nodded, scribbling something down, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Jessica had managed to stir up enough trouble to cast a shadow over everything I was doing. I was left scrambling to clean up a mess I hadn't even created. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept wondering how things had gotten so out of hand, how Jessica had turned from someone I once cared about into someone I barely recognized. I knew she was grieving, but her pain had twisted into something toxic, something that was tearing her family apart. I looked over at Emily, who had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket. In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter what happened, I would be there for her. I would protect her from the chaos, even if it meant losing everything else in my life. Everything changed the next morning with one phone call. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my usual cup of coffee, trying to piece together what to do about Jessica's latest outburst the night before. Just as I took my second sip, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick it up. "Is this Michael Garrett?" A tense, serious voice asked. "Yes, this is Michael," I replied, already feeling the unease creeping up my spine. "This is Officer Riley from the District Police Department. We need you to come in for questioning regarding a complaint. It's about your niece, Emily." My heart dropped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Emily? What complaint?" My mind raced through every interaction, every conversation, every shared moment, trying to figure out what could possibly be going on. "Sir, it's best if we discuss this in person. Please come to the station as soon as possible." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a cold, sterile gray room at the police station, heart pounding and palms sweating. Across from me sat Officer Riley, a stern woman in her early 40s with piercing eyes, flanked by a younger detective named Martinez, who looked visibly uncomfortable. The silence stretched unbearably thin until Riley finally cleared her throat. "Mr. Garrett, your niece, Emily, has made an allegation against you." It felt like a punch to the gut. "An allegation?" I repeated, my voice barely more than a whisper. Riley's expression was cold, professional. "She's claiming inappropriate behavior. Specifically, she says you've been making advances toward her." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words slammed into me like a freight train. That's not true," I stammered, the panic rising in my throat. "I would never do anything like that. Emily, she's like a daughter to me." Riley didn't waver. "Mr. Garrett, I understand this is difficult to hear, but we take accusations like this very seriously, especially when minors are involved." "But this doesn't make any sense," I said, pleading for some kind of understanding. "There has to be a mistake. Emily's been through so much. She lost her father. Her mother's struggling. I've been the one trying to hold everything together. I don't know why she would say something like this." Even as I spoke, a flicker of doubt crept into my mind. Jessica. I remembered the resentment in her eyes, the erratic behavior, the anger she had shown me. Had she put Emily up to this? Was this her way of punishing me for stepping in where she had failed? "Your sister-in-law, Jessica, is supporting Emily's statement," Riley added, almost as if reading my thoughts. "She claims she's noticed your behavior for some time now, that she's worried for her daughter's safety." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Jessica backing this up? After everything I'd done to keep their lives together? The woman I'd once cared for deeply was now painting me as a monster. Suddenly, the room felt too small, the walls closing in on me. "Can I talk to Jessica?" I asked, my voice shaking. Riley shook her head. "We've advised her not to have any contact with you during the investigation." The investigation. Those words echoed in my head. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. They were treating me like a criminal. My mind spun with the possibilities, trying to make sense of it. What had Emily been told? What had Jessica said to her? I was given a court order to stay away from both Jessica and Emily until the case was resolved. They made it clear that one wrong move could lead to an immediate arrest. Every step back to my car felt like trudging through quicksand. My life, as I knew it, slowly sinking away. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and frantic pacing. I couldn't stop replaying every memory of Emily in my mind. Every shared laugh, every tearful conversation about her dad, every time she had looked up at me with trust and gratitude. None of it added up. None of it made sense. Then, 3 days later, Marcus Reed, my lawyer and an old friend from college, showed up at my door. Marcus was one of the few people I trusted with my life. He sat me down, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Michael, this is going to get ugly. Jessica's already painting you as some kind of predator. She's pulling in people from the neighborhood to back her up. Nothing concrete, just insinuations, but it's enough to fuel a fire." I felt numb. People from the neighborhood? What could they possibly have seen? I rarely did anything out of the ordinary. Work, home, and time spent helping Emily and Jessica. And now, every innocent interaction, every shared moment, was being twisted into something grotesque. Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to find out if Jessica said anything to Emily, something that would make her go along with this. Because if we don't get to the bottom of this soon, it's only going to get worse. I nodded, my mind spinning. Jessica had always been protective of Emily, but recently, that protectiveness had morphed into something obsessive, something dangerous. Jealous of the bond Emily and I shared, maybe even resentful of it. That thought gnawed at me. But would Jessica really go this far, just to hurt me? I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to line up. Marcus was relentless, digging through every detail he could find. He talked to anyone who might have a clue as to why Emily had made the accusation. One of his first stops was Emily's school counselor, Mrs. Thompson. When Marcus spoke to me later, he explained what she had said. Emily's been withdrawn lately, Mrs. Thompson had admitted. She hasn't mentioned anything about you, but something's wrong. I don't know what, but she's not herself. Mrs. Thompson seemed clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, as if she couldn't decide who to believe. The uncertainty in her voice only fueled my frustration. Meanwhile, my life had turned into a waking nightmare. Every knock on the door sent me into a panic, and every time I stepped outside, I could feel the weight of people's judgmental stares. The rumors were spreading like wildfire. Friends stopped calling. Colleagues kept their distance. I was becoming a pariah in my own life. The only person who stayed by my side was Marcus. He was tireless, chasing leads and digging into Jessica's past for anything that might explain her behavior. Then, one day, Marcus showed up at my apartment, his expression dark. "Michael, there's something you need to know," he said, his voice low. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. Marcus dropped into a chair, pulling out a file. "Jessica's been in debt for a while now, and it's bad, real bad. She owes money all over town, and she's barely keeping her head above water." My stomach twisted, but Marcus wasn't done. "Here's the kicker," he continued. "Jessica recently tried to take out a new life insurance policy on Emily, a big one." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My mind reeled, trying to process it. Was this about money? Had Jessica really concocted this whole nightmare just to benefit financially? The idea made me feel sick, but at the same time, it was the first thing that made sense. If she could ruin me, paint me as a monster, maybe she thought she could take control of everything. Emily's life, any financial support that might come from the family, all of it. "We don't have solid evidence yet," Marcus said, as if reading my thoughts. "It's just a theory, but it's worth looking into." The next day, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the floor, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was short. "Meet me at the corner of 8th and Maple tonight. 10 p.m. Come alone." It was risky, maybe even foolish, but I was desperate for answers. That night, I arrived at the corner, standing in the shadows under a flickering street lamp, my heart pounding. I scanned the street, nerves on edge, until a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Mrs. Thompson, Emily's school counselor. She looked nervous, glancing around as though she was afraid of being seen. "Mr. Garrett," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't have much time. I shouldn't even be doing this, but I think you deserve to know the truth." "What truth?" I asked, my voice tight with desperation. She hesitated, clearly torn. "Emily's been struggling with something, and I don't think it has anything to do with you." "What do you mean?" I pressed. Mrs. Thompson shifted nervously. "I can't say much, but I overheard Emily talking to her mom. She said she didn't want to do this anymore. She sounded scared, Mr. Garrett. Scared of her own mother." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Jessica was manipulating Emily, coercing her. For what? Revenge? Money? The confirmation left me reeling. "Here," Mrs. Thompson said, handing me a small slip of paper. "This is my number. If you need help, call me. But be careful. Jessica, she's more dangerous than you think." Before I could respond, Mrs. Thompson disappeared into the night, leaving me alone under the dim light. For the first time in days, I felt a small spark of hope. Someone believed me. Someone saw through Jessica's lies. But I knew this fight was far from over. The days that followed blurred into a mix of sleepless nights and interrogation rooms. I was pulled in for a second round of questioning, this time under even harsher scrutiny. Every word felt like a minefield, every pause like a confession. The officers didn't say it outright, but I could see it in their eyes. They already thought I was guilty. Then Marcus called. "Michael," he said, his tone urgent. "They want you at the station. It's about Emily." "Emily?" My heart raced. "What happened?" "Just get down here," Marcus said. "You might finally get some answers." When I arrived at the station, Officer Riley was waiting for me outside the interrogation room. Beside her stood a woman I hadn't seen before, Dr. Lauren Callahan, a psychologist who specialized in adolescent trauma. "Mr. Garrett," Dr. Callahan said, her voice calm and measured. "I've been working with Emily over the past few days. She's been under immense pressure, but I think she's ready to talk now." Riley led me into the room, and my breath caught when I saw Emily sitting there. She looked so small, so vulnerable, her shoulders hunched and her hands clasped tightly together. "Uncle Mike," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here, Emily," I said gently, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Dr. Callahan sat beside Emily, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here, Emily. Take your time. Tell us what you need to say." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes flickering toward the two-way mirror before dropping back to her hands. She took a shaky breath. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. And then, her voice trembling, Emily began to speak. Could feel the weight of everything she'd been holding inside. "Mom, she told me to say those things about you," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. She said if I didn't, she'd make my life miserable. She said you wouldn't get in trouble, that no one would believe me. But if I didn't do it, I'd regret it." The words hung in the air, each one feeling like a punch to my gut. I tried to process what she was saying, tried to wrap my head around the idea that Jessica had coerced her own daughter into fabricating such a horrendous lie. She told you to accuse me?" I asked, my voice thick with disbelief. Emily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She said it was the only way, that she needed money, and that if I didn't do it, we'd end up on the streets. She made me feel like I had no choice. Dr. Callahan squeezed Emily's shoulder, offering her silent support. "Emily, you've been incredibly brave in sharing this with us. It's not easy to stand up to someone you love, especially your mother." Officer Riley cleared her throat, visibly trying to maintain her composure. "Emily, do you understand what your mother intended to do with these accusations?" Emily's face crumpled, and for a moment she seemed to fold in on herself. She wanted to blackmail Uncle Mike," she said, her voice trembling. "She said if he didn't pay, she'd make sure he went to jail. She said no one would believe him over me." Hearing it out loud in Emily's shaking voice made it all the more real. Jessica had been willing to destroy my life, to traumatize her own daughter, all for money. The sheer cruelty of it left me speechless. I could feel a surge of anger, raw and unfiltered, rising within me. But I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't about me. It was about helping Emily. Dr. Callahan leaned forward, her voice soothing. "Emily, you've done the right thing by coming forward. You're safe now. Your mom can't hurt you anymore." Emily looked up at me, her tear-streaked face a picture of guilt and relief. "I'm so sorry, Uncle Mike. I didn't want to do it. I swear, I didn't want to hurt you." I shook my head, my heart breaking at the sight of her pain. "It's okay, Emily. I'm just glad you told the truth." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Emily's confession settling over us like a heavy fog. Officer Riley stepped out, and I could see her speaking with someone through the glass, likely coordinating what came next. Dr. Callahan stayed beside Emily, murmuring words of encouragement, helping her steady her breathing. After a few minutes, Riley returned, her face set in a grim expression. "Mr. Garrett, thank you for your patience. We'll be taking appropriate measures regarding Jessica's actions. For now, I think it's best if Emily stays somewhere safe." I nodded, my mind still reeling. I'd spent weeks trapped in a nightmare, my life turned upside down by a lie, and now, in the span of a few minutes, everything had changed. But the damage was done. My name, my reputation, my trust in the people I loved, all of it had been tainted by Jessica's betrayal. Over the following days, Emily stayed with me, and with the support of Dr. Callahan, we began the slow, painful process of healing. She still struggled with guilt, and every now and then, I'd catch her staring at me, a mixture of sorrow and shame in her eyes. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, she finally spoke. "Uncle Mike, will people ever look at you the same again?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I don't know, Emily. Some people may never change their minds, but I don't care what they think. I care about you, and I know the truth." Emily nodded, her face solemn. I don't know if I can ever forgive Mom for this. I don't know if I can either," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "But we don't have to decide that now. Right now, we just focus on moving forward." In the end, Jessica's manipulation left scars on both of us, scars that would take years to heal. The betrayal was deep, and the trust shattered. But as Emily and I sat there in the quiet, I felt a flicker of hope. We'd made it through the worst of it, and while the future was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. We'd face it together. The day I decided to confront Jessica was gray and cold, a fitting backdrop for what I knew would be one of the hardest conversations of my life. Ever since Emily had come clean about the lies, about how Jessica had manipulated her into accusing me of something so vile, I'd been torn between rage and heartbreak. The betrayal ran deep, and as much as I wanted to move on, I knew I couldn't until I faced her. I arranged to meet her at a cafe on the other side of town, away from anyone who might know us. The last thing I wanted was for someone I knew to overhear what was about to unfold. When I arrived, Jessica was already there, sitting by the window with her back to the door. She looked out of place, fidgeting with her phone, her eyes darting around the room like she knew something was coming. As I approached, she looked up, her expression guarded. There was no hint of guilt, no trace of shame, just a stony calm that made my blood run cold. I took a seat across from her, barely able to hold back the anger bubbling inside me. "Jessica," I started, keeping my voice low and steady. "We need to talk about what you did, about what you put Emily and me through." She looked down, her fingers twisting around the handle of her coffee cup. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, but then she lifted her gaze, her eyes hard. "I did what I had to do, Michael. You wouldn't understand." I stared at her, disbelief coursing through me. "Wouldn't understand?" I repeated, my voice tinged with shock. "You accused me of abusing Emily. You destroyed my reputation, nearly ruined my life. And you want me to understand?" She sighed, sounding almost annoyed, as if I was being unreasonable. "You don't get it. I was desperate, okay? After Alex died, everything fell apart. The bills kept piling up, and I had no way to pay them. I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice, Jessica," I said, feeling my patience thin. "And you chose to hurt your own daughter, to use her as a weapon against me. You dragged her into something horrific, all for money." Jessica's face twisted into a scowl. "Oh, don't act so high and mighty. You've always been the golden boy, the one everyone loves. I've been struggling while you sit there with your steady job, your nice house, your perfect life. You wouldn't lift a finger to help us unless you had to. So I made sure you had to." Her words hit me like a slap. This was never about survival. It was about jealousy, resentment. She blamed me for everything she'd lost, for the life she thought she deserved. And instead of asking for help, she tried to tear me down. "I was helping, Jessica. I've been helping since Alex passed away. I covered your bills, helped you with Emily, even when it felt like it was never enough," I said, my voice tight with anger. "But that ends today. I'm done. No more support, no more help. You're on your own." Jessica's face went pale, her bravado slipping. You can't just leave us with nothing. What about Emily? You're punishing her too." I shook my head, my heart heavy. "Emily can stay with me. She deserves a safe, stable home, something you can't provide. But I'm not going to support you anymore. Not after everything you've done." She narrowed her eyes, a flash of anger breaking through her shock. "You think you can just take her from me? She's my daughter. She's your daughter, but she's also my niece. And I'll fight to keep her safe if I have to," I replied, my tone resolute. "You lost the right to make demands the moment you decided to use her in your scheme." Jessica opened her mouth to argue, but she stopped, her gaze shifting to the side. Following her line of sight, I saw Marcus, my lawyer, standing by the entrance. He'd insisted on coming with me, just in case Jessica decided to make more trouble. Seeing him there reminded her that I wasn't alone in this fight. "You haven't heard the last of this, Michael," she hissed, grabbing her coat and pushing past me as she stormed out of the cafe. I watched her go, a mix of relief and sadness filling me. This was the end of a chapter, one I never expected or wanted. But for Emily's sake, and for my own peace of mind, it had to be done. Filing a police report against Jessica was a decision I never thought I'd make. The idea of legally pursuing someone who'd once been family, someone I'd once trusted, felt foreign and wrong. But there was no way around it. Jessica's actions had crossed a line. She tried to ruin my life, dragged her own daughter through a twisted scheme, and left lasting scars on everyone involved. It was time to bring the truth to light. The next morning, I walked into the police station, my lawyer Marcus by my side. His presence was a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't in this alone. But my stomach churned as I approached the front desk. Officer Riley, the one who'd initially questioned me, recognized me and came forward, a look of understanding in her eyes. "We're here to file a report against Jessica Garrett," Marcus explained, his tone professional but firm. Riley nodded, leading us into a small office. As I sat down, I felt a wave of mixed emotions: anger, sorrow, and a faint lingering sense of betrayal. I told them everything, recounting each painful detail, from the accusation and blackmail to Emily's confession and Jessica's total lack of remorse. Officer Riley took detailed notes, her face grave, and when I was done, she assured me that Jessica's actions would be thoroughly investigated. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Jessica was arrested on charges of child endangerment and attempted blackmail. Word spread quickly through the family, and soon everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some relatives were shocked, horrified that Jessica could have orchestrated something so terrible. Others were skeptical, convinced I was overreacting. The family was divided, and each call, each conversation, left me feeling more alienated. My Aunt Linda, who had always been close to Jessica, called me one evening, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Michael, I can't believe you do this," she snapped. "Jessica's already lost so much, and now you're going to put her behind bars?" "She put herself there, Aunt Linda," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "She used her own daughter in a twisted scheme to blackmail me. How can you defend that?" Linda huffed, her tone softening slightly. I can't believe she'd do something like that. She's family, Michael. Family sticks together." I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my composure. She stopped being family the moment she used Emily as a weapon. I'm not going to sit by and let her destroy lives. The conversation ended on a sour note, and after that, I found myself fielding more calls, each one a variation of the same argument. Cousins, uncles, even family friends, they all weighed in. Some expressed sympathy, others cast doubt. It felt like a second betrayal, like everyone I'd counted on was turning their back on me. In the midst of this chaos, I focused on work, throwing myself into my job to keep my mind off everything. Marcus checked in regularly, keeping me updated on Jessica's case, and I found a strange sense of satisfaction in knowing that justice, at least, was being served. But the damage was done. My family was fractured, and Emily was left in the middle of it all. A few months later, I received a call from Child Welfare Services. The social worker, a woman named Miss Bennett, explained that Emily's situation was being reassessed in light of Jessica's arrest. She spoke carefully, her voice calm and measured, but I could tell she was treading on sensitive ground. "Mr. Garrett, given the circumstances, we'd like to discuss the possibility of you taking Emily into temporary custody," she said gently. The request hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for the idea of becoming Emily's guardian. After everything that had happened, part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to step in and be there for her. But another part of me, a part that I hated, was hesitant. How could I care for a girl who'd once accused me of something so horrendous, even if I knew it hadn't been her choice? "Can I have some time to think about it?" I asked, my voice sounding distant even to myself. "Of course," Miss Bennett replied, understanding in her tone. Take as much time as you need. Emily's well-being is our priority, and we want to ensure she's placed in a safe, supportive environment. I spent the next few days agonizing over the decision. Every memory of Emily played through my mind. Her laughter, her vulnerability, the way she looked at me when she finally told the truth. But beneath those memories was a lingering pain, a reminder of the trust that had been shattered. Finally, I arranged to meet with her, hoping that seeing her in person would bring me some clarity. When she arrived at my apartment, she looked nervous, her eyes downcast as she stood in the doorway. I invited her in, and we sat down in the living room, the silence stretching between us. "Emily, I want you to know that I don't blame you for what happened," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I also need you to understand that things have changed." She nodded, her face pale. "I know, Uncle Mike. I'm sorry for everything. I wish I could take it back." Hearing her apology brought a wave of emotions, but I forced myself to stay composed. "I believe you, Emily, and I know you didn't want any of this. But trust isn't something that can be fixed overnight." Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I know. I thought maybe we could try again. I don't have anyone else." The words cut deep, and I felt a pang of guilt. But I knew that taking her in would only complicate things further. My own peace of mind, my ability to move on,